We're here at the science fair and we are surrounded by wonderful trifold boards with all sorts of projects. How long has the school been involved in science fair?
So a science fair like this is our first one.
All right.
So normally, I don't know if you remember science fairs when you were in middle school.
I do.
Okay. They were like volcanoes, and you put peroxide, you put vinegar and baking soda.
How do you know what projects I did?
Because we all did that. So this year, our projects are on behavioral and social sciences, focusing specifically on Pennsylvania and Harrisburg.
That's fantastic. And what inspired you to want to do a sort of full-fledged modern science fair?
We believe in service through science, and so everything we do connects back to our community, connects back to service. So we are STEAM school. We are science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics, but we show students how this all relates back to where they live. So we made a partnership with the Department of Health, and they gave us access to all that data, and we were able to create this science fair in health, behavior, and social sciences because of the access that they granted us.
Oh, that's great. People have been here explaining their projects all day long.
All day.
Do you have a few you want to walk us through and show us?
I have a few that are pretty cool that we could take a...
Let's check them out. Okay, so we'll start with this one here. What do we have?
This is cardiovascular disease. And so this is a research question. What is the prevalence of cardiovascular disease among Pennsylvania adults by gender? And so being able to have access to the data that we were granted, she was able to plug in all the information, and it generated for her the maps and tables, and she was able to conclude that men have a higher chance of getting diagnosed because of the access that she was granted from the Department of Health.
This is my project about heart disease, also known as cardiovascular disease. Why I chose this topic is because earlier in the year I did a project on the leading causes of death, and cardiovascular disease was number one. I was curious why it was number one, and so I did a project on this. When you consume a lot of oily foods and fats, it causes high cholesterol, which builds up plaque in the walls of your arteries, and which causes blood clots to form, which leads to heart attacks, strokes, and even heart failure.
How did the students decide specifically what their hypotheses would be? And
They decided. So a lot of what we do here is experiential learning, and we give the students real-world scenarios, and the students generate their questions, and they generate their research, and they design their experiments.
That's great.
I had chosen depression, minor depression, major depression, and DISMA. The reason why I had chosen this was due to the fact that I know people that have depression. This shows a black and white world, which is the way that most of people with depression see depression with. This right here is the true feeling of a person that has depression.
I decided to look through sickle cell and about it because I have sickle cell disease, and also because my research question is, how is sickle cell disease inherited, and does girls or boys get it more?
I don't know the answer to those questions. Let's find out.
I discovered that sickle cell disease is inherited when both parents, when they have a child, that they both have the abnormal sickle cell hemoglobin cell, and then their child ends up with sickle cell, and it's 50-50 between boys and girls. Like, one gender doesn't get it more than the other.
Okay, that's very interesting. Our last project, we determined that men were more at risk than women for heart disease, but sickle cell, it's pretty much 50-50.
Yep.
And what do you think you learned from the whole process of science fair? And was it fun?
Yes, it was fun, and I learned that it takes a lot of work to put something together that makes sense and that's easy to read and look at for your audience.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing.
My research question was, what's the difference between autistic people by sex, race, ethnicity, and profession? Basically, what my project was about is how autistic people experience autism in different ways. It's a neutral development disorder. It can affect a person's characteristics and how they talk and how they socialize with other people. And that can be sometimes hard for autistic people.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you think the science fair helped you sort of learn and get a better sense of your education here?
When I first got into autism, I thought it was just about how a person basically just a disease, and I thought it could be cured, but really it's like a disorder, and it can't be cured, but you can live with it, and you can become better to live with it with the people around you. And sometimes people think that autistic people are just like machines and they don't have feelings, but really they feel love, they feel happiness, they feel sadness. It can be sometimes hard to communicate that.
That's really, really interesting. Thanks so much for sharing your project.
Depression is very common, it's treatable. I know a lot of people that have it. I have my own experience to depression. And with this depression, so my research question, it was how many Pennsylvania adults have been diagnosed with a depressive disorder. So what I got for my hypothesis, I chose like 15% of men in Pennsylvania have a depressive disorder, and 50% of the women have depressive disorder. So when I did my research, I started analyzing and looking through a whole bunch of websites. I saw that it was 18 or 19% of the men all in Pennsylvania have a depressive disorder, and 25% of the women have depressive disorder.
It's so good to see people inspired by aspects of their everyday lives and putting them in action through the science fair. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I understand you are the teacher of these wonderful 8th graders who've learned so much through the science fair project. How long have they been working on these incredible boards?
Well, there's two answers. The one, they've been working on it lifelong. They're addressing issues that are real issues that impact the community and their homes. They're addressing health and public health concerns. So chronic diseases, infectious diseases, injury, both intentional and unintentional. The Department of Health has allowed us to have access to the data set, which is one of the longest and the largest ongoing survey. It's called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. And the students are thinking about projects. They're thinking about something they have at home. In terms of how long did they work to do the research and the backgrounds, they did the entire semester from September till December. It was the winter break that they just started to use their creativity level as to what the project would look like, what their posters would look like.
Oh, we saw a lot of creativity in the different presentations today. Tell me about the partnership with the Department of Health. Did you reach out to them? Did they reach out to you? How was Marshall able to access all this data?
We do have a good partnership with our community, and there are many representatives across all disciplines, academics, as well academia, as well as businesses and public health. So the partnership became just by us learning of what the Department of Health has to offer to our communities and our students and giving them access to. We were fortunate enough that it requires technical support. And they invested the time to answer all our questions, to train us on how to use these data sets. And it's right here in our backyard. This is Harrisburg, and we have the Department of Health right off a couple blocks from this stool.
I think that's really unusual, just in science fairs generally, to have tailored it to Pennsylvania and data and the sort of real-world practical policy possibilities based on these studies. I'm guessing that maybe is the next step. And now that the science fair has been completed, will the students continue working to sort of learn the implications? If they're studying depression, are they going to maybe now look into policies and procedures and other ways to deal with depression?
That is correct, and we are very inspired by the questionings that the students have brought to the table. Everyone wants to say, why? They say, who? Are there really differences between age? Does it make a difference if the person is low income or high income for a particular condition or disease? Does it make a difference where they live by geography? And it wasn't so much as to who or why, it is where I live. Who's the ones at risk and who has it? If we know who they are, then we can step one step closer to the solution.